I've been rewatching The Haunting of Hill House this October, and I wanted to share my theories on the mold in the basement. Specifically, this is going to be a long one. You can 2x speed it. Anyways, the mold in the basement for me had three specific reasonings behind it. I know there's mold in the upstairs room with the red door. There, everybody has, hallucinates different rooms in. But I want to talk about the mold in the basement specifically and what I think its purpose was. And in general, the mold in the house is supposed to also signify, like, the house consumes people, it eats, feeds off people. And obviously, black mold also causes hallucinations, all this stuff. Anyways, the mold in the basement. One of the reasons I think for this mold was because William Hill wanted his body to be found. Why do I think this? We see a young Luke go down in the dumbwaiter and he ends up in the basement. Some people on Reddit were trying to disagree with me and say that though that was in the basement, that was some hidden cellar for the bootleg operation that they were running. If you look it up and you watch the clip, it is not a cellar. It is the same room where William is in. It is the hidden basement that they did not know about, okay? And they're not separate rooms. Anyways, Luke gets taken down there. What does he see? He sees a skeleton like monster figure, and we know William's skeleton's there. He sees a skeleton like monster figure, and he sees rats, which is also significant because later on we know that there is no rats in this house. So there's that. They eventually find out that it's an actual basement because of Theo. They go down there, and then eventually, after this big storm, there is mold. And I think the mold was also in purpose to serve as Hugh's ghost and what was haunting him because he wanted to sell this house. So it's kind of like Hugh's ghost, but also it keeps him occupied and it keeps him in the house longer and it keeps him occupied while Olivia is, being fed on by the house. So he's down there, he is like occupied by this mold. He's hearing scratches in the wall besides the exterminator saying that there is no rats. He's hearing all these scratches. He's convinced that there's rats. So he buys what? He buys rat poison that later on we know is used by Olivia, intended to use on her kids. Okay. So I also think the mold in the house was possibly William's way of getting Hugh to buy this rat poison. Because we see that William's ghost is the one who haunts Luke. Okay. And William and Poppy had two children, a boy and a girl, that were around Luke and Nell's age when they passed. And we're going to get into a little bit more of that later on. Anyways, while he was working on this mold, he takes pictures and he sees like mold, but it's shaped in people like form. He eventually breaks down the wall thinking he's going to get to the rats and he finds William's skeleton buried with his tools. And in part, it's supposed to signify that William was so guilty for having cheated on Poppy and just so guilt struck in that he, entrapped himself behind this wall, right? And then eventually regretted it and was scratching. Obviously, I think that part of it was the house feeding on him, his hallucinations. We know he went to an institution where he met Poppy when he was younger, anyways. I think in part it was his hallucinations, but my little personal theory is that also Poppy had something to do with it, okay? Because how did they not realize that this whole wall was being built and there's a whole new wall in their basement? Anyways, besides that, I think Poppy had something to do with it because we see her actively while Olivia is having these hallucinations try to feed into her and tell her things to, engulf her in the house quicker because we see that there's hills that live in there for a long time and they're, fed on by the house, but they survive and live into old age and, pass away in old age. But then we see that it's, engulfing Olivia so quickly and feeding on her and her family so quickly. Why is that? I think it's because of Poppy, because she wanted her and her children that reminded her of her own children to be awake in a sense. So that I think it was the house and Poppy hand in hand. I don't think it was, just the house. Anyways, that's my personal theory that maybe Poppy kind of also helped in William's demise. And we know Poppy also lived until her older age. Anyways, there's also a fan like speculation theory that Poppy probably had something to do with the unaliving of her children, right? Her young children, because her kids, she had a boy and a girl like Luke and Nellie, And who's to say that William and Poppy's ghost did not want to feed on these children essentially? Because we see that William haunts Luke for a good chunk of his life. And, William is the reason essentially why the rat poison was bought. So there's that, but it's speculated that, they had a hand in their children's unaliving, which who knows if they slowly poisoned their children. It was back in the day, so the poison might have not have been as strong. But their daughter unalived from like respiratory issues, and their son, for unexplained reasons, became mute and he's in a wheelchair. I think we do see his ghost throughout the series at some point. He's like in a wheelchair and then eventually unalives, and it's all like they don't know why. Right? So who's to know if they had a hand in that or not? But I also think it's kind of like ironic that Luke obviously grows up and he's haunted by William's ghost, but he also poisoned his body. And then there's the throwback to like the rat poison and Luke's poisoning his body, the whole thing. So, yeah, those are just my theories on the mold in the basement and on William Hill and why he did not live to his old age compared to the other Hills in the house, and why the house consumed the Cranes so quickly compared to, other people. So those are my theories. Let, drop a comment on what you think.